Hello and welcome. I'm Light, and this is my channel. Today we're going to talk about the Trailside Killer. So, before we get started, if you would please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps my channel. If you would please subscribe if you're not subscribed, and if you do, click that bell. Then you'll be notified when my content goes live. And as most of my content is not monetized for obvious reasons, if you would click that thank you button down below, it's like leaving a tip in a tip jar. All right, let's talk about this. David Joseph Carpenter, who was also known as the Trailside Killer, spent the years from 1979 to 1981 preying on hikers and nature walkers in and around Northern California's outdoor spaces. The Santa Cruz Mountains and Marin County beauty spots like Point Reyes National Seashore, a vast expanse of protected coastline in Northern California, were Carpenter's favorite hunting grounds. Carpenter is known to have killed 10 people and suspected of several more. There were 2 survivors of his attacks, Stephen Hurdle and Lois Rinna. And Lois Rinna happens to be the mother of Lisa Rinna, who starred in Days of Our Lives and went on to be a Real Housewife of Beverly Hills. Criminologists have described Carpenter as having a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of character. Sometimes the nice, bumbling, stuttering Mr. Nice Guy, the next an evil, sadistic hunter of women in the wilderness, ready to impart unspeakable violence. From the crimes, detectives concluded that this killer enjoyed making a ritual out of the killings, inflicting psychological torture on the victims, and as Marin County Sheriff Al Howenstein put it, putting the victims at some point in a position for pleading for their lives. David Carpenter was born in San Francisco on May 6, 1930. He was physically abused by his father as a child. His mother and father were both severe alcoholics. His mother is described as domineering. Between the ages of 3 and 11, David had a severe stutter and a persistent bedwetting problem. He enjoyed being cruel to animals. The McDonald triad, also known as the triad of sociopathy or the homicidal triad, is a set of 3 factors that has been suggested, if any combination of 2 or more are present together, to be predictive of or associated with later violent tendencies, particularly with relation to serial offenses. The triad was first proposed by psychiatrist J. McDonald in The Threat to Kill in a 1963 article in the American Journal of Psychiatry. However, no one can say for sure if this theory is absolutely true. The triad links cruelty to animals, obsession with fire setting, and persistent bedwetting past a certain age to violent behaviors, particularly homicidal and sexual predatory behaviors. Further studies have suggested that these behaviors are actually more linked to childhood experience of parental neglect, brutality, or abuse. Some argue this in turn results in homicidal proneness. Carpenter was forced to take ballet and violin lessons as a child and had a propensity to dress in garish clothing. This, together with a stutter, meant that he was a target for bullying at his school. By the age of 14, Carpenter was sentenced to California's Napa State Hospital for an undisclosed sex offense. 3 years later, he was sentenced to the California Youth Authority after he was caught molesting children too young for me to give their ages here. I'm not going to do it. Following his release, Carpenter lived what appeared to be an ordinary life. In 1955, the 25-year-old man married a 19-year-old named Ellen Heedle. Can you imagine marrying a convicted sex offender? What is the logic there? The couple had 3 children together: Michael David, who was born in 1956, Gabrielle Louise, who was born in 1958, and Grace Ann, who was born in 1960. Although having 3 children together did not mean a happy marriage. The couple's marriage was far from normal. Ellen later told authorities that her husband was a sex addict who demanded intercourse at least 3 times a night. Carpenter was linked to many serious crimes and at one time was even linked and thought to be the infamous Zodiac Killer. Those murders happened between 1968 and October 1969. He targeted young couples, with 2 of the men surviving the attempted murder. However, by 1988, it was conclusively proven in court that Carpenter was incarcerated during several of the Zodiac murders. David Carpenter was linked to the following crimes. Lois Rinna, then known as Lois DeAndrade. David Carpenter's first attack was in 1960 on Lois Rinna, who, like I said before, is the mother of Lisa Rinna, who would go on to be a reality star, The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. He knew Lois from work, and since he had just had a new baby, he asked her whether she wanted to come and see the family's new arrival. Lois was also acquainted with Carpenter's wife, so she felt comfortable going with him. He picked up Lois at a bus stop, as agreed, but then he started driving down a deserted road. He then attacked her, tried to sexually assault her, and then he tried to kill her. She was stabbed in the hand, and she was hit in the head with a hammer several times. Luckily, a military policeman whose name was Wayne Hicks had seen them drive down the road, and he knew that no one was supposed to go down there, so he followed them. Hicks tried to stop the assault. Carpenter shot at him, and Hicks returned fire, hitting him in the stomach and the leg. Lois said at the time, "I thought that was it. He's straddling me. He had a hammer in one hand and a knife in the other." For the assault on Lois and for kidnapping, attempted sexual assault, and attempted murder, Carpenter was sentenced to 14 years in a federal prison. However, he only served about 7 years. In 1970, he returned to prison after being charged with kidnapping. He was released again in 1977 after serving another 7 years. His next victim was Etta Kane, and on August 19, 1979, Etta Kane spent the afternoon hiking the trails which overlook San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge. When Etta failed to return home after her hike, her husband called the police and reported her missing. The police mobilized several officers and canine units, and the first search for Etta turned up with no clues as to where she was. The second search began the next day at dawn, and Etta's naked body was discovered in a kneeling position. Her killer had stood behind her and shot her once in the head, execution style. Investigators also discovered that her killer had rummaged through her purse and stolen her credit cards, a pair of sunglasses. However, she had not been sexually assaulted. The next victim was Mary Frances Bennett. On October 21st, 1979, Mary Frances Bennett's long, agonized screams could be heard by nearby golfers. Unfortunately, they ignored them. She was mutilated and stabbed 25 times after she was attacked while jogging, then buried in a shallow grave under a layer of dirt and branches. She was found, still warm, by a group of hikers following a blood trail near the Palace of the Legion of Honor at Land's End. One police officer said that she had been butchered. She was only 23 when she was murdered. Carpenter was always suspected for this crime, but police were never able to bring a case against him for the crime in the 1980s following his arrest. But in 2012, Inspector Joe Toomey of the Cold Case Unit said crime lab technicians had recovered unspecified DNA evidence in December 2011. They learned in January 2012 that it did match a sample of Carpenter's DNA in the state's database. The family always assumed that Carpenter was responsible based on what police had told them at the time. Barbara Schwartz, she was 23. She was out hiking with her dog in March of 1980 when Carpenter leapt out from behind a tree and attacked her. A female eyewitness who was out jogging that day saw the man attack Barbara from behind with a knife. By the time the eyewitness came back with police officers, she was dead, and the killer was nowhere to be seen. But thanks to the eyewitnesses, homicide detectives now had a general description of the killer. The jogger described him as slim and somewhere around the age of 25. Neither of these proved to be accurate. Police also found a pair of bifocal glasses at the crime scene. Days later, a couple of boys also found the murder weapon, a 10-inch boning knife that proved to have Schwartz's blood all over it. The glasses turned out to be prison-issued specs, thus suggesting that the killer was a former or an escaped inmate. Ann Alderson. Carpenter attacked his next victim on October 15, 1980, Ann Alderson. She was 26 years old. She had been walking in the woods in Mount Tamalpais State Park. I might have just butchered that. I'm sorry if I did. At some point during her hike, she ran into Carpenter, who killed her with 3 bullets fired from a handgun. Ann's body was not found until the next year by a passing walker. Like Etta Kane, Anderson had been shot in the back of the head and was found a year later in a kneeling position. However, unlike Etta, Ann had been sexually assaulted by her killer. When police asked around for eyewitnesses, they received very different descriptions of the 50-year-old man seen hanging around the park. Richard Stowers and Cynthia Moreland. Richard was 19 and Cynthia was 18, and they were planning to get married. However, the couple went missing in mid-October of 1980 after setting off on a hiking trip. Their bodies were discovered during the search for Diane O'Connell and Shauna May in November of 1980. At the time of their deaths, Stowers was stationed with the U.S. Coast Guard at the Two Rock Coast Guard Training Base. Moreland was a recent high school graduate, where she had been a popular cheerleader. Shell casings found at the scene were also a match for those from the Alderson crime scene. As it turned out, the gun used in all 3 murders was a .38 caliber pistol. Some sources say it was a .45 caliber pistol, just so you know, that had been purchased in October of 1980. The buyer, Molly Purnell, bought the firearm at a gun store in San Leandro, California. Purnell then gave the gun to Carpenter, who could not legally purchase firearms because of his criminal record. Purnell would later state that she gave the gun to Carpenter as a payment for her debt to Carpenter, who had provided Purnell with several items for her flea market. Diane O'Connell and Shauna May. On November 28, 1980, Carpenter sexually assaulted and murdered 22-year-old Diane O'Connell as well as 25-year-old Shauna May. Both women had decided to take a hike in the Point Reyes National Seashore Park on the Sky Trail. As a side note, the area was also the filming location of John Carpenter's, a relation, movie The Fog, a February 1980 horror movie starring Adrienne Barbeau, Jamie Lee Curtis, Janet Leigh, and John Houseman. Diane was in a group of 3 hikers, and she was second in the group coming down from the trail. The first of the group arrived at the bottom, but Diane was nowhere to be seen. At about 3:10 and 3:20 p.m., hikers in the park heard several gunshots. Rangers, volunteers, and police combed the park. One searcher saw a shoe sticking out of some ferns. On closer inspection, he found 2 bodies, which turned out to be Richard Stowers and Cynthia Moreland. They had been left face down in the underbrush. Later that day, Diane O'Connell and Shauna May's bodies were also discovered, found side by side and face down, making it 4 bodies found in one day. The killer had stuffed a pair of underpants into O'Connell's mouth and nose, while leaving another pair of blood-stained underwear on her arm. A forensic examination proved that Diane had been strangled with a narrow piece of wire or cord while she was alive. She and Shauna had both been shot in the head. May's corpse showed ligature marks on her wrists. Her body contained semen in her lower regions. I'm taking a moment to explain something to you here. Even though this will be unmonetized, it could be taken down and I could get a strike if there's too many of certain words used in the video, which is why I choose to not be specific sometimes to keep that word count down. And then I hope it just comes across by whatever else I say so that you'll understand what I'm talking about. All right, let's continue. Although no semen was found on O'Connell's body, she, like May, had been brutally attacked sexually before her death. And here's the most troubling part about this. Well, there's a lot. But these women did not know each other. So detectives have deduced that one woman must have come upon Carpenter murdering the other by chance. Thus, she sealed her fate. Ellen Hansen and Steve Hurdle. David Carpenter got a new job in February of 1981. After working for a chain distributor following his release from prison, he took a job with Econo Quickprint, which was a small printing shop in Hayward, California. Carpenter struck in the Henry Cowell Redwood State Park on March 29, 1981, when he came upon 20-year-old Ellen Hansen and her friend, 20-year-old Stephen. The pair was having a walk across the Santa Cruz Mountains. They were on spring break from UC Davis and had just gone past the observation tower. Carpenter told them both that his plan was he was going to sexually assault Ellen, and after that, he was going to shoot them both. Steve confronted Carpenter, who then shot Ellen. Ellen passed away, while Hurdle managed to survive, even though he had been shot in the neck. Hurdle provided police with a clear description of Hansen's killer, and he would also later pick out Carpenter in a police lineup. And then a 10-year-old girl took a piece of cardboard and drew the shape of a red car. That car turned out to be Carpenter's red Fiat. Heather Skaggs was 20 years old when she went missing on May 1st, 1981. Her decomposing body would later be found in Big Basin State Park. More than any of his other victims, Carpenter had a direct link to Heather. She was a college undergrad, and she had worked at Econo Quick Print to make some extra money, and David Carpenter was one of her co-workers. The gossip around the office was that the older Carpenter was a creep who wanted to date the much younger Skaggs. Apparently, Heather did not take notice of this office gossip. Her boyfriend, Dan Piggle, told police Heather had asked Carpenter to give her a ride to Santa Cruz so that she could purchase a car for one of his friends. Carpenter had made it very attractive for her to go and see the car by offering to check the vehicle, loan her the money, etc. Fortunately, she had left details of Carpenter with her boyfriend, as he was concerned about this situation. That would be the last time that anyone saw Heather Skaggs alive. On May 24, 1981, hikers in Big Basin State Park discovered her nude and decomposing corpse. Semen was discovered inside of her, and on an autopsy proved that she had died from point-blank being shot in the face. Besides the fact that Carpenter was the last person ever seen with Skaggs before her death, investigators proved that the same .38 caliber handgun had killed both Skaggs and Hansen. The gun was traced to Carpenter. Later, it came out that Carpenter went to dinner and the ballet the evening he murdered Heather, seemingly oblivious to the murder earlier in the day. Carpenter also killed Anna Kelly Minjiver. She was 17 years old. Her body was found at Castle Rock State Park. He also killed Carol Laughlin. She was 19 years old, and she worked in the Curry Village gift shop in Yosemite National Park. David Carpenter was charged with 5 counts of murder, rape, and attempted rape on July 31, 1981. Due to all the publicity that the murders received in Santa Cruz County, Carpenter's trial was moved to Los Angeles County. He was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Richard Stowers, Cynthia Moreland, Shauna May, Diane O'Connell, and Ann Alderson. Carpenter also was found guilty of sexually assaulting 2 of the women and attempting to assault a 3rd. He was sentenced to death in the gas chamber on November 16, 1984. He remains on San Quentin's death row. Following his conviction for the Marin County murders, Carpenter was tried and subsequently convicted by a Santa Cruz jury for the murders of 2 other women, Ellen Hansen and Heather Skaggs. The same jury also found Carpenter guilty of attempted murder of Hansen's hiking companion, Stephen Hurdle, the attempted sexual assault of Hansen, and the assault of Skaggs. In 1995, the Santa Cruz convictions were overturned due to a juror misconduct. The California Supreme Court later reinstated them. In December of 2009, San Francisco police re-examined evidence from the October 21, 1979 murder of Mary Frances Bennett, who was jogging at Land's End when she was attacked and stabbed to death. A DNA sample obtained from the evidence was matched to Carpenter through State Department of Justice files. In February 2010, police confirmed the match with samples taken from Carpenter. Thank you for coming to my channel, and good night.